You are not who you think you are, not even close. The person you see in the mirror every morning, the name you answer to, the story you carry about who you are, where you come from, what you are capable of, that is not you. That is the surface. And beneath the surface, there is something so vast, so ancient, so completely unlike anything you were ever taught about yourself, that when people encounter it directly, for the first time, they never quite recover from it, in a good way. The way you never recover from falling in love, the way you never recover from witnessing something so beautiful, that it breaks something open in you that you did not know was closed. The ancient traditions, every single one of them, without exception, agreed on something, that the human being, as ordinarily understood, is a vast underestimation, that what you are carrying around inside this body, inside this name, inside this ordinary human life, is something that has no beginning, has no end, has never been damaged by anything that happened to you, has never been diminished by any failure, or loss, or disappointment, or year of quiet desperation, something that is right now. As you listen to these words, completely intact, completely whole, completely awake, waiting, not for you to become something different, for you to remember what you already are tonight. That is what we are going to do together. Blocco dois desenvolvimento. Let me tell you about a conversation that happened in ancient Egypt, not a conversation recorded in the official histories, not something you will find in any mainstream account of what the Egyptians believed. A conversation that took place in the inner sanctuaries of the great temples between a priest and a candidate for initiation. The candidate had been preparing for years, fasting, meditating, studying, learning the sacred texts, purifying the body and the mind, doing everything the tradition required, before the doors of the inner sanctuary would open. And on the night before the initiation, the priest sat with the candidate and asked a single question. Who are you? Not as a test of identity, not as a formality, as the most serious question that one human being can ask another. Who are you? And the candidate answered, I am the son of a farmer from the Delta. I am 32 years old. I have 2 children. I have studied the sacred texts for 7 years. And the priest was quiet for a moment. Then he said, that is who you have been. That is not who you are. Try again. The candidate thought longer this time. I am a seeker of wisdom. I am someone who wants to understand the nature of reality. I am someone who believes there is more to existence than what appears on the surface. And the priest nodded slowly. That is closer. But that is still a story, a better story than the first one, but still a story. Who are you before the story? This is the question that the entire Egyptian initiatic tradition was built around, not as a philosophical puzzle, as a direct inquiry into the nature of what a human being actually is. Beneath the biography, beneath the personality, beneath the entire accumulated structure of a life that has been lived so far. What is left? What is present? When everything that was added is temporarily set aside. The Egyptians had a very specific answer to this question. And their answer was not a belief, not a theological proposition, not a comfort against the fear of death. It was a map, a precise and detailed map of the actual structure of the human being. What we are made of, how many layers there are, what each layer does, and crucially, which layers end, when the body ends, and which layer has never ended, has never begun, is not subject to time at all. They called these layers the bodies, not in a metaphorical sense, as actual distinct aspects of what a human being is, each one subtler than the last, each one extending further into dimensions of existence that the physical senses cannot detect. And the entire Egyptian mystery tradition was a technology for helping human beings move their center of identity from the outermost layer to the innermost one, not as a spiritual achievement, as a recognition of what was always already there now. Before we go into the layers themselves, I want to say something about why this matters, not philosophically, practically, because there is a specific kind of suffering that comes from identifying entirely with the outermost layer of what you are, the body, the personality, the biography. When you believe that is all you are, every threat to it becomes existential. Every loss feels like annihilation. Every failure feels like a verdict on your fundamental worth. Every year that passes takes something from you that cannot be replaced. And the fear, the low constant background fear that most people carry through their entire lives, without ever quite naming it, is the fear of the outermost layer, knowing that it is temporary, knowing that it will end, and not knowing what lies beneath it. The Egyptian tradition was not a comfort against this fear. It was a map that, if followed inward, reveals something that changes the relationship with fear entirely, not by eliminating it, by showing you what it is and is not afraid of. Bloco tres, desenvolvimento dois. The first layer, the one you know best, the Egyptians called it the Khat, the physical body, the flesh and bone and blood that you carry through the world as if it were the most obvious thing about you, because it is the most obvious thing about you. The Egyptians did not dismiss the Khat. They understood it as something extraordinary, as the vehicle, the precise and extraordinarily complex instrument through which consciousness experiences physical reality. The second layer, the Egyptians called it the Ka, the vital force, the etheric double, an exact energetic replica of the physical body. That interpenetrated it completely and extended slightly beyond its edges. Modern science has no framework for the Ka, but the tradition that describes it is not limited to Egypt. The Vedic tradition calls it the pranamaya kosha, the body made of vital breath, the subtle energy body that animates the physical. Traditional Chinese medicine calls it qi and has spent thousands of years mapping the pathways through which it flows, the meridians, the energy channels, the points at which it can be influenced. To restore balance to the physical body, acupuncture, one of the oldest medical systems in human history, is based entirely on the understanding that there is a subtle energy body interpenetrating and animating the physical, and that illness in the physical often originates as disturbance in the subtle. The third layer, the Egyptians called it the Ba, usually translated as the soul, but this translation loses something essential. The Ba is not the soul in the religious sense. It is something more specific, more personal. The Ba is the aspect of the human being that carries individual character, individual memory, the unique quality of a particular consciousness, the thing that makes you recognizably you, even across different states of existence. The Egyptians depicted the Ba as a bird with a human head, The bird aspect represents the freedom of the Ba, to travel beyond the physical body, even during life. The human head represents the retention of individual identity. During that travel, the Ba could leave the physical body, during sleep, during deep meditation, during states of extreme physical crisis, and return, carrying memories of where it had been, what it had encountered, what it had understood, in dimensions of reality that the waking physical consciousness could not normally access. Modern research on out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, lucid dreaming, and certain states of deep meditation is mapping the same territory that the Egyptians described as the travel of the Ba, with different language, with different conceptual frameworks, but pointing at the same phenomenon, that consciousness is not as tightly bound to the physical body as ordinary waking experience suggests, that it can operate, perceive, learn, and retune on with information. From beyond the boundaries of the physical, the Ba was also understood as the aspect of the human being that maintained continuity across lifetimes, that carried the essential quality of an individual consciousness through multiple incarnations, not the specific memories of a particular life, but the deeper pattern, the fundamental orientation, the accumulated wisdom and unresolved questions that a consciousness carries from one form to the next. This is the layer of you that has lived before, that will live again, that is not defined by this particular body, or this particular name, or this particular set of circumstances that you call your life. Bloco quattro, disinvolvimento tres. The fourth layer. The Egyptians called it the ib, the heart, not the physical organ, something more precise than that. The ib was understood as the seat of consciousness, the center of moral and emotional intelligence, the place where the deepest knowing lives, the knowing that is not thought, not analysis, not the conclusion of a rational process, but the immediate, direct, embodied recognition of what is true. The Egyptians did not locate consciousness in the brain, they located it in the heart. And they were not being poetic. Modern neuroscience has discovered that the heart contains approximately 40,000 neurons, that it has its own nervous system, that it communicates with the brain in ways that are still not fully understood, that the electromagnetic field generated by the heart is 60 times stronger than the field generated by the brain. When you feel something, before you have had time to think about it, that is the ib. When you know something is wrong, even though every rational indicator says it is fine, that is the ib. When you meet someone, and in the first moment of contact, something in you recognizes them as someone who matters before a single word has been exchanged, that is the ib. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the central ritual of the afterlife was the weighing of the ib, the heart, placed on one side of a scale, a feather on the other, the feather of Ma'at, the feather of truth, of balance, of alignment between the inner life and the deepest nature of reality. This was not a moral system, not a reward and punishment framework. It was a description of natural law that governs what happens to consciousness when it is no longer anchored in a physical body. Lighter consciousness moves toward deeper dimensions. Denser consciousness cannot, not because it is punished, because density is its own limitation. The fifth layer, the Egyptians called it the Shut, the shadow. The Shut was understood as the aspect of the human being that carries the unresolved, the unintegrated, the parts of the self that have been pushed into darkness, not because they are evil, because they have not yet been seen, not yet acknowledged, not yet brought into the light of conscious awareness and integrated into the whole. Carl Jung, working in the 20th century, described the same phenomenon and called it the shadow self. He had almost certainly never read the Egyptian texts, but he arrived at the same understanding, that the human psyche contains not only what we know about ourselves, but what we do not know, not only what we have accepted, but what we have rejected, and that the darkness ignored does not disappear. It accumulates, it grows denser, it begins to operate from beneath the threshold of awareness, influencing choices and reactions and relationships in ways that the conscious mind cannot account for. The Egyptians understood that the shoot required attention, not suppression, not judgment. Attention, the willingness to look at what had been placed in darkness, to bring it into the light of awareness, because a shadow, seen clearly, loses its power over you, not because it disappears, because you are no longer being governed by something you cannot see. Blocco cinco, disinvolvimento quattro. We have now covered 5 layers: the Khat, the Ka, the Ba, the Ib, the Shoot. 5 aspects of what you are, each one more subtle than the last, each one requie. Ring more of you to perceive directly, and we have not yet reached the deepest ones, the ones that the Egyptian tradition considered the most sacred. The 6th layer. The Egyptians called it the Sahu, the spiritual body, the aspect of the human being that begins to emerge as the inner work deepens, as the Ib becomes lighter, as the Shut becomes integrated, as the center of identity begins to shift from the outermost layers towards something more fundamental. The Sahu is not something you are born with in its fully realized form. It is something that develops, that crystallizes over years, sometimes over lifetimes, of genuine inner work. It is the body of the awakened consciousness, the form that awareness takes when it has sufficiently freed itself from identification with the outer layers. The ancient Indian tradition describes something very similar in the concept of the Vijnanamaya Kosha, the body made of wisdom, the subtle form that awareness assumes when it has sufficiently developed to perceive the deeper dimensions of reality. The Sahu was described by the Egyptians as luminous, as radiating a quality of light. That was not physical light, but that could be perceived by those whose own inner development had reached a sufficient level. This is why certain teachers, certain contemplatives, certain human beings who have done the deep inner work have a quality about them that cannot be accounted for by their physical appearance or their intelligence or their social skills. Something that you feel in their presence before they have said a single word. A quality of stillness, of depth, of being somehow more present than ordinary people are present. That quality is the Sahu, the 7th layer. We're approaching the innermost sanctum now, the place where the Egyptian tradition meets the Vedic tradition, meets the Buddhist tradition, meets the Hermetic tradition, meets the mystical core of every genuine wisdom school that has ever existed on this planet. The Egyptians called this layer the Ak, the immortal divine self, the aspect of the human being. That is not separate from the divine, not close to it, not connected to it, not a small piece of it, identical with it. The ek is not something you develop, not something you earn, not something that emerges as a result of sufficient spiritual practice. It is already here. It has always been here. It was here before this body was born. It will be here after this body returns to dust. It is the awareness that is receiving these words right now, not the thoughts about the words, not the images and associations they trigger. The awareness underneath all of that, the simple, undeniable, ever-present fact of being aware. That is the Ak. The Vedic tradition calls it Atman. The Buddhist tradition points at it through the concept of Rigpa. The Christian mystical tradition calls it the ground of the soul. Different names, different traditions, different centuries and cultures, separated by thousands of miles, all pointing at the same recognition, that at the very deepest level of the human being, there is something that is not limited by any of the categories that the human mind uses to organize experience, prior to subject and object, prior to self and other, prior to the distinction between the individual and the totality in which the individual appears. The Ak simply is aware, present, without beginning, without end. The eighth layer, this is the deepest, the most difficult to describe. The Egyptians called it the Sa, the divine body, the fully realized form of consciousness. In complete union with the divine, not approaching union, not in the process of uniting, already united, already complete. The Sa is not something that is achieved at the end of a long spiritual journey. It is what was always already the case. Before the journey began, before the separation was imagined, the entire Egyptian mystery tradition was a technology for remembering this, not for creating the Sa, for removing what was obscuring it, for clearing away, layer by layer, everything that was preventing the consciousness from our recognizing what it actually was, what it had always been, what it could not stop being, even when it forgot. The Sa is not a destination. It is the ground you're already standing on. It is not something you will find. At the end of the seeking, it is what you are before the seeking began. Block 06, Desenvolvimento 5. Now, I want to bring this map out of the ancient temples, out of the sacred texts, out of the language of the initiates, and into the only place where it actually matters, your life, right now, today. The first thing this map means is that you are not one thing. You are not simply the person that your biography describes, the collection of experiences and choices and relationships that have accumulated over the years and that you have learned to call yourself. That is the Khat and the Khat, the outermost layers, real, important, worthy of care and attention, but not the whole story, not even close to the whole story. And when you forget this, when you collapse your entire sense of self into those outermost layers, something happens. Every threat to those layers becomes a threat to your existence. Every criticism becomes annihilation. Every loss becomes irreplaceable. Every sign of aging, every change in the body, every shift in the social roles that have given you your sense of who you are becomes a kind of death. Because at the level of the outermost layers, it is a kind of death. Those layers change. they age, they eventually end, and a consciousness entirely identified with them. Lives in a constant, low level, never quite conscious. Terror of that ending. This is the source of most human suffering, not the actual losses, the mistaken identity, the belief that the outermost layers are all that you are. The second thing this map means is that healing is possible at every level, not just the physical. The Egyptian tradition understood that illness, whether physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual, could originate at any layer, and that treating only the outermost layer, without addressing what was happening in the subtler ones, would produce temporary relief, but not genuine healing. Modern medicine treats the Khat, and it does this with extraordinary skill in many domains, but it has no tools for the car, no framework for the bar, no understanding of the ib or the shoot as real dimensions of the human being that require attention and care. And so people heal physically and remain unwell in ways they cannot name. They address the symptoms and leave the source untouched. They manage the surface while the deeper layers continue to generate the same patterns, the same recurring difficulties. The third thing this map means is that what you are looking for is not somewhere else. The human being spends an extraordinary amount of energy searching outside itself for what can only be found inside, for the sense of completeness that the outermost layers keep almost delivering and never quite do. The achievement, the relationship, the recognition, the moment when finally everything will be enough. The Egyptians understood that this search, however sincere, however desperate, was oriented in the wrong direction, not because the outer world has nothing to offer. It has everything to offer: beauty, connection, meaning, joy, but not the completeness the soul is actually seeking, because the completeness the soul is seeking is not a condition to be achieved, it is a nature to be recognized, the Ak, already present, already whole, already complete, not because everything is perfect, but because what you are at the deepest level is not affected by whether everything is perfect. The fourth thing this map means is perhaps the most important: that nothing has been lost. Not really, not at the level that matters most. Whatever has happened to you, whatever was taken, whatever broke, whatever failed, whatever you have grieved and carried and tried to set down and found still there in the morning, none of it touched the Ak, none of it diminished the Sa, none of it reached the innermost layer of what you actually are. The outermost layers suffered, and that suffering was real. It deserves to be honored, it deserves to be seen. But beneath the suffering, beneath the layers that were wounded, something remained, intact, unchanged, undimmed, waiting, simply present, as it has always been, as it will always be, regardless of the weather. Block 07, CTA plus desinvolvimento. 6. If you have stayed with me through all of this, through the 8 layers, through the map that the Egyptian tradition spent thousands of years constructing, I want to pause for just a moment, not to interrupt what we are building, but to say something directly. This channel exists for exactly this kind of conversation, not for mysticism as entertainment, not for ancient wisdom as aesthetic, for the genuine transmission of what these traditions were actually pointing at, which is not a belief system, not a set of rituals, not a spiritual identity to adopt, but a direct recognition of what you actually are. beneath the biography, beneath the personality, beneath the layers that life has added, to what was always already present. If that is what you are here for, subscribe to Sacred Flame, because what we are uncovering together, video by video, goes deeper than any single conversation can contain. And I want you present for what comes next. Now, back to the map, because there is something I have not yet said that changes how you use it. The 8 layers are not a hierarchy, in the sense that the higher ones are better, and the lower ones are to be transcended. This is a misunderstanding that has caused enormous confusion in spiritual traditions across history. The idea that the body is lesser, that the physical world is to be escaped, that the goal of inner development is to leave the outer layers behind and dwell permanently in the inner ones. The Egyptian tradition understood something different, something more sophisticated, and ultimately more compassionate. All 8 layers are expressions of the same consciousness. All 8 are the divine, appearing in different densities, at different frequencies, for different purposes. The Khat is not less divine than the Ak. It is the Ak, in its densest, most particular, most specific form. The physical body is not a prison for the soul. It is the soul, at its most concentrated, its most localized, its most capable of the kind of experience that only physical existence makes possible. The texture of physical sensation, the depth of human relationship, the specific beauty of a particular moment, in a particular place, that will never exist again in exactly this way. These are not consolation prizes for being trapped in matter. They are the point, the entire point, of the ark choosing to take form. The ocean does not reluctantly become a wave. The ocean waves because waving is one of the things the ocean does. Because the experience of being a wave, of having a particular shape, a particular location, a particular moment of arising and returning, is something the ocean, infinite and undivided as it is, cannot have without the wave. You are the universe's way of knowing itself from the inside, from this particular angle, through these particular eyes, at this particular moment, which has never existed before and will never exist again. And the invitation of the Egyptian map is not to escape this. It is to inhabit it fully, to be in the outer layers with the full awareness of the inner ones, to live in the Khat with the recognition of the Ak, to be completely here in this body, in this moment, in this ordinary, extraordinary human life, while simultaneously knowing what you actually are, not one or the other, both. The wave, knowing it is the ocean, still being the wave, still moving, still particular, still here, but no longer afraid of dissolving, just here, fully, knowing what it is, and finding in that knowing a freedom that the outer layers alone could never provide. Block 08, Fechamento Magistral. I want to leave you with something simple, not the map, not the 8 layers, not the Egyptian vocabulary, or the philosophical framework, or the historical context. Something beneath all of that, something that the map was always pointing toward. Right now, in this moment, before you do anything else, before you think about what this means, or how it applies to your life, or what you are going to do differently tomorrow, just notice that you are aware. Not that you are thinking about being aware, not that you are having an experience of awareness, just that awareness is present right now, Before you decided to be present, before you chose to pay attention, already here, already awake, that awareness is the Akh, not a part of it, not a reflection of it, not a temporary expression of it. It, fully present, in this body, in this moment, wearing this particular life, with all its weight and beauty and unresolved questions, the way the ocean wears a wave, completely, without remainder, without holding anything back. The wave is not a partial ocean, it is the full ocean, in a particular form, and you are not a partial expression of the divine. You are the full awareness in this particular form, right now. This ordinary moment is the Akh knowing itself. This breath is the divine experiencing breath. These words entering your awareness, a consciousness meeting itself across the temporary boundary of two apparently separate human lives. The Egyptian priests knew this, not as a belief, as a recognition that everything they had been searching for was what had been doing the searching, that the map, as beautiful and precise as it was never the territory. The territory was always here, inside. The place that every genuine mystical tradition, in every culture, in every century, has been pointing at, with different words, through different forms, toward the same recognition, that you are not looking for something you have lost. You are looking from something you have always been. And the moment you stop looking outward and turn the attention inward, not toward a thought about awareness, but toward the awareness itself, the awareness that is simply already here, something shifts, not dramatically, not always with fireworks or visions or sudden certainty. Sometimes just a quiet settling, a sense of arriving somewhere that you have always been, but somehow kept forgetting, like coming home, not to a place, to what you are, before the layers were added, before the biography accumulated, before the world told you who you were, and you believed it. Before all of that, there was this awareness, this presence, this simple, undeniable, ever-present fact of being here, of being aware, of being. That is the Akh, that is the Sa, that is the innermost layer, that the Egyptian tradition spent thousands of years teaching people to recognize, and it is available to you right now, in this moment. Not at the end of a long spiritual journey, not after sufficient practice or preparation. Right now, in the 30 seconds after this video ends, in the moment before sleep tonight, in the space between one thought and the next, whenever you remember to look, not outward, inward, toward the awareness that is looking, toward the Akh, toward what you actually are, beneath the layers, beneath the biography, beneath everything that was added, to what was always already complete. If something in this conversation landed for you, if one of the 8 layers, name something you have always felt but never had words for. Share this with 5 people, not to promote a channel, but because somewhere in your life there is someone who has spent years searching outward for what can only be found inward, who has been looking for completion in all the places that almost deliver it, but never quite do. Give them this map and leave a comment below. Tell me which layer surprised you most. Tell me which one you recognize as something you have felt without ever having a name for it. And if there is a question living in you, something this conversation opened, that you want to go deeper into, leave it there, because that question might be exactly where we go next, together, Subscribe to Sacred Flame, because the map goes deeper with every conversation, and we are only just beginning to explore the territory.